So moving on to applications to medicine,
Mhm.
and I mean, like students every year, they want to know like how to get in for medicine and like what kind of preparation they should do, and just wants to hear like when you were applying, is there like what kind of preparation you did for your medicine
Yeah.
application?
Um, there's so many different elements to specifically to medicine application. I think the main one that maybe other subjects don't have would be things like
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We've got a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
hello, yeah. My name's Louisa.
But you might want
Do I need
this,
to move closer?
or you can bring this.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Louisa and I'm a 5th year medical student at Trinity Hall. So I've been around a while. I'm now considered a clinical medic and I've already done my 3 years pre-clin.
Nice. So as Louisa said, she's a medic, and today we're going to be talking about studying medicine at Cambridge, hearing what it's like from the student's perspective, going through, got a lot to go through, like the course,
Yeah.
what it's like day to day, course structure, and yeah. So firstly, Louisa, how come, like, how did you come about choosing medicine and why Cambridge?
Yeah.
Big,
It's
big questions.
Yeah, it is a big question, but I think it's an important one, and every medic has their own story. I've been asked this question a lot of times because it is so important, and I still don't really have a straightforward or simple answer. I think for me, it's a combination of things. So when I was at school, like most people at Cambridge, I was quite fortunate with my academics and my grades, and I was doing all right. And my teachers said maybe you should consider applying to Oxbridge, and also choosing a course that's like quite academic, not necessarily at Oxbridge, but just generally at any uni. And I think medicine has a reputation for being quite prestigious and a lot of work, and it's not an easy course to get into. So if you have good grades, you have a good chance of getting in. So that was one factor. I don't, like a lot of medics, I actually don't have any medics in my family.
Okay.
So that wasn't a factor. It wasn't sort of parents encouraging to follow them in their career. It was very much a personal choice. And I think influenced by my own family. So my dad was diagnosed with a bone condition called osteoporosis abnormally young. And it also usually occurs in women. So that was kind of interesting. And I was about 15, 16 when that happened. And I thought, it was cool. I'd like to know more about that. My brother's got Down syndrome. So I've been a sort of young carer through my whole life. And I think that kind of inspired me to keep going with healthcare. And also, I just think the NHS is really cool. So I wanted to go and work in the NHS. So it's a combination of things. And then why Cambridge? I guess I've already said, I think it's a very well-known academic institution. And I was lucky that I had teachers at school who suggested maybe considering it. And then the other factor that I always think about, when I was 7 or 8, we came on a camping trip to Ely and we had a day trip to Cambridge. And I just remember walking around and thinking it was really nice. So yeah, that's kind of why.
Nice. Wow, a lot of really meaningful reasons to choose a course. Do you think I mean, you just mentioned the NHS, I was just quite curious. Do you think you'll like go into the NHS afterwards?
It's a funny one. Before I applied, I was so dead set on it. And I still like to think I will. But having now started my clinical skills teaching, so for the last year and a half, I've been sort of in hospitals basically the whole time. And seeing how the NHS is coping, or not coping at the moment, has actually been really difficult.
Yeah.
And speaking to older students and junior doctors who are or were striking last year, seeing them quite almost struggling with their careers is very disheartening and does make you question a lot. But I know that the NHS is one of the reasons I went into medicine, and I don't want it to be the reason that I leave. And I think there are ways around it, and I'm hopeful that some change will come about in the next few years. And we have just had some very successful strike action that has increased pay. So I'm hoping that things will be okay. But it's difficult to say. I still at this point don't even know what speciality I want to do.
Yeah.
So it's early days, but I'd like to think I would stay in the NHS. That is my goal. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I know a few of my friends, they're like either junior doctors now or working and teaching. And I think it is like, it does, the country's not in a...
It is a shame, but most people don't go into medicine with the intention of leaving. So
no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can only really know how difficult it is
when you're there.
Yeah. I think you can only really have a say in the matter if you're in that position, whereas I think a lot of people like to make comments, but it's easier when you're not actually a doctor or a
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah.
Back to Cambridge and medicine. So medicine at Cambridge. Can you tell us a bit more about the course, the structure?
Yeah.
Like, because I heard something about how it's more of a traditional course. If you could go into that a bit more.
Yes. So if you're looking at different medical schools across the UK, there tends to be 2 or 3 different styles of teaching, and Oxbridge is considered traditional. Some of the others are considered what's known as integrated, and then there's problem-based learning. And I would like to think most universities actually kind of do a mixture of all 3, but some of them will focus more predominantly on one or the other. So Cambridge, the course structure is preclinical for 3 years and 3 years clinical. So I'm in my clinical stage now. And what that means is the first 3 years are all based in lecture theatres, lab skills, practical classes, seminars, small group teaching. And then the last 3 years, you're basically in hospital the whole time or on GP placement. So it's very sort of a tale of 2 halves, and it changes a lot after 3rd year. And the same at Oxford. And then some of the other, particularly the London universities and some of the other Russell Group, they do what's called an integrated course, although a lot of them are changing over to PBL, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So integrated is sort of a lot of lectures in the first few years, but you're still getting that clinical exposure from day one. So you might start off with a GP practice placement just to ease gently in. You might do a bit of shadowing, and then as the years go on, you kind of decrease the proportion of lectures and increase the proportion of contact time in hospital slowly over the 5 or 6 years. And then problem-based learning, it kind of has that as well. But in terms of the teaching, it's a bit more student-led. So you're given a case maybe on a Monday morning, and then you'll go away and you'll be given a research group, and your little group will go away, research the case, come up with what you think the diagnosis and management plan is, and then you'll meet again later on in the week, have some teaching relating to that case, and then on the Friday afternoon, you might come back and discuss the final diagnosis and management plan, having been taught about that over the week. But it's a lot more research and self-directed driven from day one, and you will still have placements and stuff, but it's all linked to a kind of the case that you're given early on, hence the kind of problem-based approach. So Cambridge doesn't really do any of that. And if you like group work, PBL is probably a good place to look. But if you're looking for lectures and teaching and very, as you say, traditional style, then Cambridge and Oxford definitely offer that.
Nice. Wow. So when you if you don't mind me asking, which unis did you apply for, and what was your thinking when trying to decide between, if I'm right in saying, traditional style, problem-based medicine course and integrated?
Yeah. So for me, I knew I didn't really want to do problem-based learning. I looked at a couple of unis that, so I applied to Exeter, Nottingham, Imperial and Cambridge, and most of them all of them were integrated or traditional. But then even when I looked at, actually only went to open days for 5, the only other one I looked at was Southampton. And Southampton and Exeter both had a degree of problem-based learning in their course, more so than the others, but still classed their whole course as integrated. And I think the thing with the problem-based, especially the ones that focus really heavily on it, is a lot of group work from day one. And if you're not used to that, then I think for me, I'd been to I went to a massive sixth form, 600 students doing A-level maths in 1 year group. So every lesson kind of felt like a lecture because the ratio of students to teachers was very skewed. So I just felt like being at a university that focused on lectures would suit my kind of learning style. And also just, I didn't think it was a very particularly productive way for me to learn personally, doing group work when we're all brand new to the course. I just thought it would be quite slow to get going, and I really wanted to be immersed in the kind of teaching aspect from day one. And I just think sometimes looking at one case over a week feels a little bit slow for me, but I can understand that for some other people, having that very clinical approach from day one where you're looking at medical cases, I think actually if that's what you really are passionate about, then problem-based learning is a really good way to approach the degree. But I just felt personally I liked the idea of being a uni student that does lectures. And also I didn't like the idea of being a medic that was separate from other uni students. I think it's really easy for some medics who are really passionate about their degree. They would quite like the idea of they are a medical student, that's their identity. Whereas for me, I wanted to go to uni and have that kind of more normal uni experience whilst being a medical student. And I think the traditional courses, and to a degree the integrated courses where you're still in lectures, you feel a little bit more like how all of the other uni students are taught, which I liked.
Nice. Yeah, because I know that some unis, like the medics, even their accommodation blocks might be different to the other courses, whereas in Cambridge, you're situated in a college just like everyone else.
Yeah, and sometimes you even share lectures. In my first 3 years here, I had lectures with vets and natural sciences students. And then in my third year, which I guess we can talk about later, I did a kind of different course entirely, and that was all mixed up even more. And that just really appealed to me because I was like, I'm going to have my whole career ahead of me as a doctor. So it'd be nice to feel that a little bit more like a normal student for as long as I can. But some people absolutely know from day one they want to be on the wards and seeing patients. So if that's you, then I would probably suggest considering somewhere else.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean now. Yeah, because you can kind of choose to kind of like be a trainee doctor
Yeah,
immediately at 18, or you could choose a course that's kind of
bit
pushes
delayed,
that
yeah.
delaying for like a few years at least. Are there any like favorite lecture courses that you have?
When I was a first year, I mean, my first year was during 2020. I'm that old now, and the lectures were all online. But I had supervisions in person, so that's like small group teaching that supplements the lectures. And my supervisor for physiology, he was great. He'd just been through Cambridge as a medical student himself, and so he gave us a lot of really useful advice and was really empathetic towards us because he knew what it was like to be a student. And I think that really also made me have a greater appreciation for the subject he was supervising, just because I felt like he was teaching it to us really well in a way that we understood. So physiology was great, but I think also Cambridge is really unique in that it still does dissection for anatomy, like full body cadaveric dissection. And that was a really hands-on approach. It was really quite daunting on the first day because of the pandemic, we were all isolated from the other students. So it was like one student to one cadaver, whereas pre-pandemic it was maybe 8 students. So on day one, it's just you going in there on your own, which is quite a weird experience, but also so immersive and felt so unique and so crazy. And yeah, I really enjoyed anatomy as well. Although I did struggle. It's a difficult course, but I did really enjoy it. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. Sounds like a lot to learn. I mean, I guess that's pointing out the obvious.
Yeah.
With medicine. So if like anyone who doesn't know, or what does a day in the life look like for a medic? Like, let's say like pre-clinical, so the first 3 years, and then clinical maybe.
Sure. Yeah. So although it's split 3 years and 3 years, pre-clinical and clinical, it's really 2 years, 1 year, and 3 years.
Okay.
So the first 3 years are the first 2 years of those 3 are very medical based. So you'll have anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, a bit of statistics and ethics in your first year. And then in your second year, it's more like pathology, neurology, neuroscience, it's a bit of psychology and psychiatry. There's definitely some other things I'm missing from second year. It's a big course. Immunology, pharmacology, and reproductive health. So there's a lot more going on in second year. I'm pretty sure I'm still missing something. We had a lot of exams. And then the third year at Cambridge is really cool because you get to choose from a range of different subjects. It's the same at a few other universities. I think Imperial does it. Oxford have integrated courses or integrated intercalation. So that's basically 1 year where you do a fast track of a degree. And
this is intercalation?
Yeah, so this is the intercalated year. At Cambridge, it's the third year. Some of the other medical schools, it'll be in your 4th year or 5th year. But at Cambridge, you can choose basically any subject you like, as long as you have the A-levels that would allow you to take that course. So I did history and philosophy of science, which was so different to the first 2 years, but also really fun. And it's technically classed as a natural sciences course. So there are a lot of other science students who take it, but there are also people doing history course and economics and philosophy and all sorts of students all joining onto this one course for a year. So that was still lectures, but it was a lot more essays. The exams were all essays, and I did a dissertation as well. But I had some medic friends who did pathology in their third year.
What was your diss one?
It was on climate anxiety, and should we reframe it? Is anxiety a good term for it? Because if it's usually with anxiety, if you take a very like psychiatric approach, it's a clinical diagnosis where someone has irrational or sort of overinflated fears and phobias and worries. But climate anxiety is, in my opinion, quite a justified response to actually a very real problem.
Yeah.
And if you act on, usually if you have generalized anxiety, if you act on those fears and those thoughts, it actually makes the problem worse, and it just spirals unless you get help or intervention in some way, and you can get better. Whereas with climate anxiety, if you actually fix the problem or you act on those thoughts, it would actually fix the problem to an extent. And I think it's a very interesting term that we've used because it almost makes out that people with climate anxiety are being irrational, because anxiety as a medical term is quite irrational, but it's very different. It's not irrational at all. It's actually a sensible way to think, and it's So I looked at the justifications of why should we reframe it based on like a big fear for people with climate anxiety is that governments aren't doing enough. And then I did a kind of case study into what the UK government has and hasn't done, and greenwashing and their failings in the past with public health, like I looked at the Change for Life programme. So it was a big project, but I really enjoyed it. And then I did a little other essay on COVID vaccination as well, and kind of the ethics of vaccinating carers when we could have vaccinated other more vulnerable people. And yeah, it was a crazy year. And yeah, I loved it a lot. And I did a bit of history of medicine as well. So it was ethics, law, medicine, history. Yeah, very different.
Wow, that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Climate anxiety I've never heard the term, but I think it's very justified. It could just be called climate concern.
Yeah, exactly. That's fundamentally what I think it is. But third year was very, very different. And the nice thing with Cambridge is the way the courses, all of the undergraduate courses are structured, means that it's a kind of year-on-year basis. And every year, most students either learn something in more depth or they learn completely new content. So it's very easy to transition onto a different course in the third year. Whereas I think at Oxford, you have to stay in the kind of biomedical sciences. And again, at the other universities, the other medical schools, if you intercalate, you usually have to stay within medical sciences. At Cambridge, if you want to, you don't have to change. So I made the decision to do history and philosophy of science. But I had a lot of friends, like I said, that did anatomy or physiology, pharmacology. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and that's a really nice thing. And then you get to graduate after third year with all your friends, because most of your friends from undergrad will have just done 3-year course. So that's nice. You get to go to graduation dinner. And then you progress to the clinical school, which is very different.
Nice. Wow. So I think some students would also want to know, like say if I'm a medicine student, a medic, and like I wake up, like what is my day looking like?
Yeah.
Like how many lectures are there? Am I spending the all afternoon in the lab? How often, etc.? Am I in the library?
So I'll go through. I think the busiest year that you'll have as a student, especially at Cambridge as a medic, is second year. So day in the life in second year is probably quite a good insight. So I rowed, or I was a member of the boat club in my second year. So I would wake up at like 6:30, head out on the water. And funnily enough, quite a lot of medics seem to row. Weird thing that we do. So I'd go down with my friends to the boat club for 6:45 start time, be on the water at 7, row for an hour and a bit, get on my bike, and then about 8:30 leave the boat club, go straight to lectures for 9 a.m. Usually you'll have a 9 a.m. lecture, maybe one at 11 till 12, so 2 in the morning with an hour break in between, and then you'll have lunch. You could come back to college for that. Some people eat in the dining hall here, which is quite nice. In my second year, I lived kind of up the hill, so I would usually stay in town because I'd have things on the afternoon. So come back to college for lunch. Maybe if I have an online practical, so sometimes they're still online. Post-COVID, they're just kind of stuck around that way. Go to the library for a couple hours and do that. If it's an in-person practical, go to the lab in town. Usually those are 2 to 3 hours long. And then maybe have a supervision after that. So it's quite a lot of contact hours. Supervision maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. And then around 6 o'clock, come to college, have dinner, or go home and have dinner. And then depending on what day of the week it is, might go out clubbing with friends afterwards. So Cambridge club nights tend to be midweek is like Wednesday night. It's quite a big one. And then go off to bed hopefully not too late if I've got rowing again the next morning. But it's a pretty busy day. There is time to see friends, and definitely over lunchtime. And with that 1 hour break in the morning, it's quite a nice time to get a coffee with someone or work together.
Oh, I see.
So there's definitely time to kind of see people, but you do have to be quite clever about when you do it. You can't really be missing lectures because then you'll get behind quite quickly. And supervisions for medics tend to have 4 or 5 a week minimum, and sometimes you'll have them on weekends. So you will have a lot of contact hours, and they will tend to be in the evenings just because your daytimes are so full of timetabled lectures and practicals. So you will have less free time than a lot of the other students, but it's still definitely like a fun time. And I miss the undergrad life quite a lot.
Yeah. So you have like 4 or 5 supervisions a week?
Yeah,
Really?
definitely in first year and in second year as well. Third year was, you'll never have that many again in third year. Yeah.
You get your money's worth.
Yeah, your peaks in second year for sure, and you really do get your money's worth.
Yeah, damn. So talking about workload, I think as you're like reaching onto the topic, I think students, they're thinking about medicine, aren't too sure about it because they're worried about the workload, and they're worried about whether they're going to be able to have time to do other things. Just want to know like what kind of things have like you managed to do alongside your degree, and like what would you say to those students who are thinking like, can I like do societies and have a social life as well as a
Yeah.
medicine degree?
So I think I'm speaking to someone that's done a lot of extracurriculars, and I'm probably actually unrepresentative of most people. But what I guess the fact that I'm still here and have gone through the course, having done so many, does mean you can definitely do them. So my main one probably over the last 4 years has been rowing. That's very much early morning focused. And if you don't row, you're not losing out on that time. So in terms of things most people do in the daytime, there's other stuff. So every college at Cambridge has, pretty much every college has an annual kind of end of year celebration. We call them Mabels. Ours is a June event because it's a little bit smaller. And I was on the committee for that for 2 years, running the Instagram account and the Facebook and the website, so publicity officer. So that was one thing. Every college has their own, kind of like a students' union. They're usually called JCRs for the undergrads and MCR for the postgrads. I've sat on both committees for those. As a JCR rep, I ran the accommodation ballot, but you can do loads of different things. It's a very cool, fun way to get involved in making an impact at the college. You can run sports societies or just attend sports societies. So I've run yoga sock here for a few years now, and that's in the evenings, so it doesn't clash with rowing. You can get involved in music and drama productions. I don't think I've done any of those yet, but I'm a member of Music Society and I sometimes play on the piano here. So there's probably loads of other things you can do. There's a language school in Cambridge and they do language classes. I think you can pay for really regular classes or just go to a few. Sometimes the colleges fund them if it's relevant to your course. So I know people that have done that through their degree. And then there's a lot of degree related extracurriculars as well. So I'm quite interested in climate health, hence the kind of climate anxiety stuff in my third year. And I was on the One Health Committee, which is linking like veterinary medicine and public health and global health, climate stuff. So I've been on the committee for that as well. So there's probably loads of other things I'm forgetting, but you can definitely get involved. And I think every year I've been here, I've done at least 3 or 4 extracurriculars. The newest one I've got is Cam FM. So I'm hosting a radio show now every week, which is fun.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay. I feel like I'm put on the spot now.
No, this is very different. I have podcast different, but yeah, I have a Cam FM show. So that's a student-run, like radio channel. Yeah, it's good. It's good fun.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, you're doing loads. I mean, I think, like a normal routine, like if someone can keep on top of their work, is like when they're working like 9 to 5 and 9 to 6, and then you have the evening off. I mean, as you were saying, as long as you manage to like attend your lectures and not fall behind.
That's definitely how I did it, because especially as an undergrad at Cambridge, the terms are really short here. So your 8 weeks will be busy, but then you'll have a 6-week break where you can do loads of revision and consolidation. And that was all that got me through, was kind of really using the holidays. And it does mean you don't really get a long rest. And if you're someone that needs to rest in your holidays, then maybe consider having less on in new terms. You don't have to revise as much in the holiday. But my view was like, if I'm only here for 8 weeks, I'm going to throw myself into everything. And I find that I'm lucky I have quite a high social battery, so I can keep going for 8 weeks and then revise in the holiday, and it still feels like I'm doing okay. So I think it's a very personal thing. I have friends that wouldn't want that. But if you want to get involved, you definitely can, even with a busy schedule and contact hours. It's certainly doable, but you might be a bit tired.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I don't know when you sleep with that schedule.
Yeah.
But I think you really make a really good point that because you were saying you worked out what was like works for you, and it might not work for someone else. I think the issues of students is when you're comparing yourselves to like every single other person, and there's always a feeling of like you could always be doing more.
Yeah.
And then, but what works for them might not work for you. And I think also students don't realize that other people are probably thinking the same thing about whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is like so huge. And I still have it now. And I've definitely struggled to find, I think like people have different attitudes to work in Cambridge, and some people, especially those that are involved in the teaching and examination element, might think that you should be here to focus on your studies. But if you want a different experience where you're here to make fun and make connections and have a great time, then you can definitely do that. But you just have to be a little bit prepared that if you've grown up with academic validation and being told that grades are really important, and then when you come to Cambridge you struggle a little bit more, that's fine, but you just have to be prepared that might happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's quite amazing how like someone who's like putting a lot of time in their studies and they're enjoying their studies will like envy someone who is like doing like a silly amount of extracurriculars, and then the person who's doing the silly
Yeah,
amount of
yeah,
extracurriculars will envy the person who's doing really well in the
yeah.
studies.
Hmm.
I guess the grass always seems to look greener on the other
Yeah,
side.
definitely.
Um, so moving on to applications to medicine,
Hmm.
and I mean, like students every year, they want to know like how to get in for medicine and like what kind of preparation they should do, and just wants to hear like when you were applying, is there like what kind of preparation you did for your medicine
Yeah.
application?
Um, there's so many different elements to specifically to medicine application. I think the main one that maybe other subjects don't have would be things like work experience, volunteering.
Yeah.
They really like all of the medical schools really like applicants to have had some work experience, just because working as a doctor is like unlike anything else, pretty much, apart
Yeah.
from maybe being a nurse. But even then, you would be expected to have work experience.
Mm.
So I think it's something that a lot of people get stressed about, but actually work experience can be a lot of different things. It's great if you have got some hospital stuff, but I had a mixture of hospital and kind of non-hospital volunteering. So volunteered at a care home and a disability play scheme. So those are two things where you're still doing a caring role and working with members of the public. So that kind of counts. So I think that's one aspect that I focused on. And then the other thing for a medicine application is obviously having good grades and being academic and hardworking. But I think it's kind of likely that if you're considering applying for medicine, that's probably something you've already almost definitely got. But definitely, I would say be wary that if you get an offer, you can't just let that slide. In order to get the offer, you have to have good grades. But equally, once you've got the offer to get into university, you still have to maintain those grades. So it's something to focus on the whole way through your application and not just to kind of bank in advance. You don't want to just get good predicted grades and then not actually meet those grades. So keeping up with your studies throughout your application is really important. The other aspect, I guess, is the entrance exams. So I sat two, but now there's only one available. So everyone sits an exam called the UCAT. It used to be called the UK CAT. And it's very different to any exam most people have done before. It's a sort of thinking skills exam. And so I prepared for that. That was definitely a big part of my application.
So how did you prepare for the UCAT?
Can I come back and quickly
Yeah,
mention
of
the other
course, yeah,
thing?
sorry,
The
yeah.
other thing is personal statement.
Okay.
And again, I think some universities are moving away from that too. But if they still require a statement or a personal statement of some kind in the future, then that's definitely something to consider. But it's basically just a CV of everything you've done. And the only other thing is interviews. But again, we can talk about that in a minute. So you asked me about the UCAT.
Yes.
Yes. So how did I prepare for the UCAT? I sat, because I had to sit two entrance exams back in the day in 2019. I had one scheduled for early September. And so I decided to sit my UCAT way in advance of that one because I didn't want to have to revise for two different exams too close together.
Yeah,
So I sat my UCAT really early. The other advantage to doing that was it meant I had my grade from my UCAT super like early on in the application process. So I had a long time to decide where to apply with that grade. So in terms of the actual preparation, I think there are 5 sections to the UCAT and they're all very different. One's kind of maths based. One's like reading texts, verbal reasoning, I think they call it. One's looking at shapes and patterns, that's abstract reasoning. And then there's like a kind of problem solving, decision making section, which I really liked. And then there's also a situational judgment test, and that's looking at almost like medical scenarios where things might go wrong and there's ethical problems, and you might be a medical student and what would you do and who would you tell, and that kind of thing. So it is quite, I quite think I'm maybe a bit odd, but I think it's quite a fun exam because it tests all these different skills, and
it
it's
checks
unlike
out, right? Because you're doing medicine now.
yeah, I suppose so. Obviously didn't hate it that much. But it's very different to exams you'll sit at school. And people sometimes like to think you can't revise for it because it tests your thinking skills, and some people will say you are born with these skills or you're not. But I do think with practice and training and understanding what they're assessing, you can definitely increase your score. And I went from quite a low score in certain sections to basically a good high score across the board in every section through targeting the areas that I found I was weaker at. So my protocol was I had like 5 weeks before this exam where I was like, right, I'm going to sit down, and these 5 weeks are my preparation weeks, because I think it was at the end of year 12 and I was kind of doing mocks and things. So I did the mocks and then I had 5 weeks and then the UCAT. So in those 5 weeks, the first week, because there are 5 sections, I said, right, I'm going to focus on a different section every day for 5 days. And then on the Saturday, I'll do a full paper. And whichever sections I'm struggling with the most, I will do double of the week after. And the sections I'm fine on, I just won't do. So I had like 2 sections I needed more work on. So the next week, Monday, Tuesday, I did one of those. Wednesday, Thursday, I did the other one. And then maybe another section on Friday, another section on Saturday. And then if those were improving, I would just kind of tailor how many days I did each week, depending on which sections were harder. And then as the weeks went on, I kind of leveled out in all of them, would do a day of each, a practice paper on the weekend. And then I think in the last week, I just did so many practice papers over and over again. And I would say a lot of students worry that they have to pay for resources to practice. And there are companies out there that can, charge you quite a considerable fee for UCAT practice resources. And that's fine. If you want to pay, you can definitely pay. And I know people that did and found those to be really helpful. But I will say the best resources that you will find are the official ones, because no one can really know what the exam's going to be like apart from the actual people that make the papers. So I just used the online UCAT question bank and drilled that through so many times. And the nice thing about it is there are so many questions on there that even if you've done all of them once, you'll have forgotten the first ones you did. So you can go back and do them again. And that means you're saving money and also using the really high yield resources. So that's what I'd recommend. And if you are really struggling with any one section and you just don't understand why, a good thing to do, I think, is go and look at YouTube videos. There are loads of people out there who have sat this exam before you, can give you advice. You just type into YouTube, like verbal reasoning, UCAT advice. Someone will have some advice for that section. So you can definitely do very well in the UCAT. And if it goes wrong, you can resit it. I think you have to resit it the next year, but you can take it as many times as you need to if you really want to get into medical school.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think one thing that really stuck was when you said some people think that like critical thinking and thinking skills is a natural talent, but you definitely can cultivate that skill. But and there might be very few people who are just very good at critical thinking and they can reason things and they don't really know how they do that. But that doesn't mean that a lot of other, like, you can't like build those skills. Did, like, when you were doing the UCAT, did you notice that like your reasoning was like improving compared to like the first time that you did it?
Yeah, I had a quick look at what the UCAT was way back at the beginning of year 12, just like a one afternoon. I knew I was going to have to sit this exam months later, and I thought, I'll just have a quick look. And I remember at the time, I was a bit surprised. I think the main pressure with the UCAT is running out of time. So I knew I could answer the questions. Actually understanding the questions wasn't so much of a problem for me, but it was doing them quickly and getting quicker at it. So drilling, the 2 sections I really struggled with for timings were the maths, because it's like tax band calculations and really complicated things. And then the verbal reasoning, where you have to read through a paragraph and find the author's argument. And that sometimes takes quite a while if you are quite new to it and you don't know how to scan text. But you will pick up speed with practice and time and learning techniques. So this is one of the things I think you definitely can see progress in, and I know I did. I actually, to motivate myself, kept a kind of spreadsheet with my scores over the weeks, and I could see them improving, and that made me feel like, I'm doing better. So that was helpful, I think. And I would say if you are struggling to motivate yourself, realizing that you are improving is a good way to check.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when they don't have the test anymore, but we had to do the TSA for applying to chemistry at Oxford. The TSA is the same one that they do for PPE, so there's a lot of critical thinking. And the first question it was like a verbal reasoning, like there was a paragraph, and it was like, what is the main conclusion for this for this argument? Read the first one, I thought, that's the answer. Then read the next 4, and I remember looking at all of them, think that they all say the same thing. And but then obviously with practice, I kind of like noticed like the subtleties between like these different like statements, and there's definitely something that you can cultivate over practice, or like those kind of critical thinking books or verbal reasoning books to kind of explain what's happening underneath it. So moving from the admissions assessment, the admissions test, did you do any preparation for your interview?
I did. So the Cambridge interview and the Oxford interview are unique pretty much in that they're very traditional. So it's like a job interview almost, though even those are changing now. But yeah, so you'll have usually a couple of interviewers, and it will just be you on your own, and they'll speak to you for 20 to 25 minutes. And they could ask you basically anything, but it's usually related to what you've been studying at school. So the preparation I did for that was very much it was quite crammed in because it was amongst all of the other non-Cambridge interviews that I had, and they were different. But I had about a week to prepare for Cambridge between some other interviews that I had. So I just revised loads of GCSE science content. Basically, I crammed biology and a little bit of chemistry and some maths. And I might have looked at some physics formulas because someone told me they could ask me physics, but I wasn't doing physics A level. But thankfully, they didn't ask me any physics, but it was a lot of biology. So I found a really good free website. It's called Seneca, and it basically runs like practice questions or it almost covers the whole like GCSE syllabus. So I would select like AQA GCSE biology and then just run through their course really quickly. And it was quite interactive, so it made it a bit more fun than just looking back at my flashcards that I kind of wanted to forget about after doing my exams. So that was a good resource. I think for Cambridge especially, it's just a case of learning your scientific facts and trusting yourself as well. I think a lot of the Cambridge interview and Oxford interviews, it's a bit of a mental test as well in terms of your trusting in yourself and not, keeping your cool in the interview. A lot of people get very stressed and struggle, and they get flustered and they don't know what to say. And you'll hear from me now and also from loads of people on the internet that you have to think out loud. That's the thing everyone says.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you need to be able to form coherent sentences and get your thoughts straight and think slowly. And practicing that, I think, is really useful before your interview. So trusting that you know your stuff and that you know your GCSE content and that it is in the back of your mind. So when they ask you that question, you can somehow work your way back to that knowledge that you've got and take it back to basics. And if you're completely off, then hopefully the interviewers will help you. They usually do. They certainly did for me. And I think knowing that and building that mental resilience before going into the interview is also a really valuable thing to do. And then my other medicine interviews were completely different. And it was like almost hot seating, rotating around a room. They ask you things like, why do you want to be a medical student? And it's so different. So just also being able to switch out of that mindset and knowing that your Oxbridge interview is not going to be like that is a useful thing to realize as well.
Oh, so those later interviews were interviews from other universities?
Yeah, so I think I had a couple, maybe one or two before my Cambridge interview. I think Exeter and Nottingham were quite early on, and then my Imperial interview was in January, I think, and they were all three of those were very similar in style. So the Cambridge one was very unique and different, and so being able to switch off from preparing for the other three and just focusing on the Cambridge interview for a week was a really useful thing to try and do, I think.
And do you remember like what your Cambridge interviews were like? What
so I had at this college, I'm at Trinity Hall, I had 2 interviews, both in person, although I think a lot of them are online now, but the format's basically the same. So my first interview was at like 3:00 in the afternoon, and it was about 25 to 30 minutes long. And it was with 2 medical fellows at the college who happened to eventually become my supervisors. And they kind of took it in turns to ask questions. So one of them spoke to me for 10 minutes, while the other one wrote notes, and then they swapped. And they started off with a really general question, and I think that's quite common from hearing what other students had asked as well. So they asked me, like, tell me about this topic. So they said, tell me about tissues. And I felt at the time, I questioned in my head, I was like, I could make a joke here about like tissue paper. And I was like, no, don't do that. Like, don't make a joke. Don't do it. Resist the temptation. He means like cells, stick to cells, like stick to biology. So I did. I'm very grateful I did. So I talked about like tissues are made of cells. Like I went literally what I was saying earlier, go back to the basic facts.
Yeah.
And we're taught, what do we know about tissues? Tissues are made of cells. And then I said, what are cells made of? Well, cells are made of like organelles, and organelles are made of like lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates. And then they said, okay, well, could you draw me a phospholipid membrane? So I had a whiteboard and they made me draw a phospholipid membrane. And then he asked me, I felt like it was both me directing. I kind of would say things, and then in response, the interviewer would ask what they wanted to ask, but it was always a mixture of me and him kind of leading. So that was quite cool. And that reassured me that they wanted to see where I was going and what I was thinking. And once I kind of figured out that was what they were trying to do and just suss out how I was thinking, I felt a bit more relaxed. And I was like, they're actually just trying to see how my brain works They're not trying to catch me out. They're just curious. So I'm going to trust that what I'm saying is what I want them to hear. And that was the first sort of few minutes. And then the second, we swapped to the other interviewer, and he presented me with this strange looking device, and it had like a glass column in it. And he was like, "What do you think this is?" It had a pump. So I said, "Well, it looks like a thermometer or like a meter of some kind, and there's a pump, so maybe it's to do with pressure." And he was like, "Oh yeah." And then he showed me a photo, like a really old print. There was like a painting of a horse, and it had this same column like sticking out of its neck. And we chatted about what that might be. And then I think I wasn't 100% convinced by my answer, but he said it's a like a blood pressure monitor for horses from a long time ago, and it had mercury in it, which is not, the mercury was in the column,
right? Okay,
but they wouldn't use that nowadays. We joked about that. I remember joking about mercury in it definitely being a good thing that it's not used anymore. So yeah, and I definitely remember getting something distinctly wrong. They asked me like, well, it was, I don't know, I think they asked me this to just see how I would respond. So they asked me what the density of mercury was, and I remember thinking, I have like, why would I know this? Because it wasn't anything I'd kind of just learned off the top of my head, and I didn't remember the density of mercury from chemistry A level. Yeah, so they made me guess, and I just took a random guess, and I wasn't too far off, but I remember thinking, because he really pushed me. He was like, just guess. And I was thinking, already, if I have to guess, I'm probably going to get this completely wrong. But I think they wanted me to be okay with guessing and be okay with getting it wrong. And I knew that, so I kind of didn't mind. But that was the first interview. And then I had about 2-hour break between that one and the second one, which I think is kind of common. And I remember there was a student, another medical applicant, who was in the other interview at the same time I was in mine, and then we swapped. So I went into the second interview, and they had my personal statement and a little picture of me on the table. And they asked me, and it was my director of studies actually was doing that interview. So my director of studies, and then another fellow, and it was in his office. The room was really nice, there's sofas and a round table. And he just said, so I've got your personal statement here, and I can see you've mentioned you did an EPQ, which is it's an extended project qualification, and it's a little sort of side project you can do at A-level.
What was your EPQ on?
The human cytomegalovirus, which it's actually really interesting. Well, to me anyway, 60% of people have it, like just latent in their cells. But if you're immunocompromised, it can kill you. But it's so common, like so many people have it and don't realize because it doesn't cause any damage.
What was it again?
Human cytomegalovirus, HCMV. Yeah, because it's not that big a deal unless you're immunocompromised, and then it's a big deal.
Then it's a big deal.
Yeah, so I was worried if you're on immunosuppressants. So say you have cancer, it could be really serious. And I was thinking, well, more and more people are getting cancer. So my topic title was, to what extent is HCMV a threat to the future of the UK population? Yeah, well, they asked me, it was the first question in my second interview, and I think they started with it because they knew I was comfortable talking about it, which was nice. And I remember almost thinking, yes, they've asked me about something I know about. So they just asked me to tell them about it. And it was quite funny because I think I kind of fell upon the topic of my EPQ by looking at current Cambridge research. And then my interviewer was like, oh yeah, I know the 2 guys that are researching this right now. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not so happy they've asked me about this. But they actually didn't press me for anything too much. I think it was just a kind of icebreaker question. So we chatted about that. And then I kind of got onto the topic of immunocompromised patients and ethics of that. And that was I think it was just a kind of friendly conversation. So that was the first half of that interview. And then the second interviewer, I think she presented me with a graph. It's not uncommon they'll give you a graph or an equation or something like that in an interview. And it was an oxygen dissociation curve. So it's something from A-level biology. And we looked at how that adapts if you live in a mountain versus at sea level, and how different animals kind of change their physiology to match the oxygen saturation in the air. And I remember really struggling with some equations she gave me, and then I remembered it from school, and we chatted about that for a bit, and then we were out of time. And that interview seemed to go really quickly. It might have actually been a bit shorter than the first one, but yeah, it was very much focused on stuff I'd studied at school, and they didn't ask me anything I didn't think I was at least to some degree knowledgeable about. They might have pushed me. In fact, the last question they asked me in my first interview was really funny because after they asked me and I gave them some kind of rough idea of what I thought. They said, actually, no one knows the answer to this question, but we just thought we'd ask you and see what you thought. And I was like, oh, okay, all right.
That says a lot about interviews.
Mm,
it's not really about the answer.
Exactly.
Always.
They just want to see how you deal with them throwing all sorts of questions at you, and thinking out loud and not, losing your focus in a difficult, challenging environment. And that's I really enjoyed that because I kind of knew they were going to do that. Nice. And I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm ticking off that Cambridge interview experience. This is what I thought was going to happen. But I think a lot of people get really flustered and kind of panic. But if you go in knowing that that is the kind of thing they're going to ask you, I think that really helps. And I kind of, when at the end they were like, yeah, no one really knows, I thought, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. So it was quite enjoyable. I enjoyed it. And also the interviews are at Christmas time, and I was lucky that back then the interviews were in person, and it was just nice to be in Cambridge. But even if I hadn't been here, I think it was cool to it's the first glimpse of people. Most people have never really met anyone who's a fellow at a Cambridge college or a supervisor at Cambridge college. And you hear about these Cambridge interviews, and then, I think when you actually experience it, it's quite cool. So I was like, yeah, this is fun, even if it was actually quite scary. And I knew I was like, oh, this is quite important here. But I would say try not to think about it that way, and then you can enjoy it a bit more.
Yeah, I definitely think people should, applicants should be encouraged to ask questions to the interviewer if they're confused of what they've said. They shouldn't, if they don't understand the question, they shouldn't just sit there and not say anything.
I think a good way to overcome that hesitancy or thinking, just saying, I don't know, a really good way, I think, to address that or overcome that is to say, I'm not entirely sure what this might be, but I know this could be related to this, and this thing is something you've studied. So, for example, if they asked me about the horse with the jugular vein and the pressure, I might say, well, I don't actually know what the device is, but I can see it's in the horse's neck, and I know that there's a big blood vessel that runs through the neck, and you can see it pulsing. So maybe they're looking at that, and then they would go, or no, and tell you. Exactly. So I think just this is the whole thinking out loud thing. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but you have to follow it up with something you do know.
Yeah, you can't, because if you say I don't know and then not say anything, you're kind of giving up. They want to see you keep trying.
They want to see you persevere.
That's yeah, exactly. Did you ever explain the mercury question, how expected you to know the answer, out of curiosity?
I think they kind of explained what was in. It was really odd. It was like a really old drawing from the 1700s, and so it was actually quite hard to see what was going on in the drawing. So once that kind of stopped me from figuring it out easily, and then once I asked, I was kind of well, I'm not actually sure what I can see in the drawing. And he said, well, this is a glass column, and can you see something in the column? And then I was like, oh, actually, I can see there's a kind of pressure line and a fluid line. Maybe they're reading the blood pressure.
Because I guess if it's liquids, then it tends to might be similar to water. Could be. Then that would have been a decent. Yeah. So the last question that we have here is did you think about Oxford, and was there any?
It's actually a really good question. It's a really important question, because I kind of didn't, and then I did briefly, and then I didn't again.
Right.
And the reason for that being, as I mentioned way back at the start, I came to Cambridge when I was 7 years old on a day trip and loved it and thought it was a really pretty place, and I knew I liked it and I had fond memories. And I'm I can be a very indecisive person, but I have a habit of going between lots of different ideas, and then I always end up choosing the first one anyway. Yeah. So I was like, I could just save myself a lot of hassle here if I just cut all of that out and just stick with Cambridge, because I know I like it. And I'd never been to Oxford ever. So that was one thing. The other thing was the difference in the courses. So Oxford doesn't do dissection. They do something called prosection, where you kind of get taught from a lecturer about anatomy, and they show you demonstrations of individual parts of the body, whereas here we do full body dissection. And I just thought, well, when you're a doctor, you don't operate on just a limb, you operate on a person who has a limb. So I thought it was a bit more realistic, and also just a rarer experience, quite unique to Cambridge. And so that was another thing. The third option was that the intercalation I mentioned earlier. So I did history and philosophy of science. At Oxford, you have to do biomedical science. And I love medicine, don't get me wrong, but I just thought it'd be really cool while I have an opportunity to do something different, to do something very different. And Cambridge was the only one of the two that offered that. I think the other thing if there was another thing, maybe I've forgotten it. But yeah, I was just more familiar with Cambridge than Oxford. I didn't even go to the Oxford Open Day. I'd kind of already decided. Fair. Oh, no, there was one other thing. At the time, the applications, and I think it's still somewhat relevant now. So at the time, this other entrance exam you had to sit was called the BMAT, and Oxford didn't accept the summer sitting, so the September, August sitting. They only accepted an October, November sitting, and that meant you didn't know what your grade in the BMAT was until after you applied. Whereas Cambridge didn't mind which one you sat, but if you sat it in August, you know what your grade was before you applied. So I sat it in August, and my plan was if I didn't do very well in the BMAT, I just wouldn't bother applying to Cambridge, and otherwise it would be a wasted application. So I'd applied to somewhere else with my UCAT score. But I ended up doing well in the BMAT, so then I went full steam ahead with Cambridge. But Oxford, I thought it was a risk, because if I applied to Oxford, failed the BMAT, then they would have just completely disregarded my application from day one, pretty much, because Oxford has a very clear, like, they care about your GCSE grades, your predicted grades, and your BMAT score at the time. Now, I suspect it will change slightly based on UCAT being the used exam. But I still think Cambridge stereotypically has a very holistic approach to looking at applications, and if you're slightly weaker in one area, if you're stronger in another, you can probably still get an interview. And they do interview a lot more candidates as well, and I was like, I kind of want that interview experience. So that was definitely the application process. I just felt like Cambridge fitted me better, and kind of guaranteed me more steps along the way, so I was quite tactical with it as well. So there are some key differences, I think, for people to consider. It's not a case that Oxford and Cambridge are exact. They're kind of similar when you get there, but I think in terms of the application process and the course structure, which are all things you should consider before you apply, there is definitely some key differences. And I definitely did think about those too.
Nice. It sounds like you applied just for the interview.
It was definitely a motivating factor, but yeah.
And now that we're on it, I'm quite curious to know how similar was like the medicine interview to like medicine supervisions now? Are they similar?
It really depends on your supervisor. I will say that. I think, my anatomy supervisor in first year was my first interviewer, and his interview style and kind of asking us loads of questions during supervisions, they were very similar. So he was very much, he would ask us a question, even if he knew we didn't know the answer, he'd ask us and then hope we'd figure it out. Unfortunately, with anatomy, I think it is one of these things you kind of know what you don't know. But that kind of then encouraged me across first year to make sure I knew my content before the supervisions. So it worked in a teaching style, I suppose. But then some of my other supervisors, especially the ones who've been students at Cambridge in recent years, who maybe are a couple of years older than me, I feel like their supervisions are very much us asking them questions and them then helping us through lecture content that we're unsure about. So it is a mixture, and every college is different. Your supervisors will be different. And then at the clinical school in the last 3 years, and I haven't talked much about that today, but that the supervisions at clinical school are different again. They're kind of bedside teaching. So I've actually just come from one today before this. And it was an hour with myself, another student, and our supervisor, who's a registrar. So he's a bit more advanced through his training. And we found a patient, he found a patient who had some stuff going on with his lungs. And then we got our stethoscopes out, had a listen, examined him, spoke to the patient. So that's very medicine focused, very patient focused, very clinical. But you still get that kind of small group one-on-one teaching. So that continues all the way through the 6 years, which is really nice. And we have also had some more traditional style supervisions with him, because as much as I'd love the exams to all be clinical patient facing, even in the clinical years, there is a lot of written examination and you do just need to know your facts. So we've done some fact-based teaching with him as well.
Nice, damn. And sorry, I'm asking loads of questions.
No, it's good. I think it's good for people to know.
Yeah. Just for like the viewers to have an insight on what like clinical medicine's like. What has your past like few months been like? Because it's your first year of clinical medicine, right?
So I am in my second year of clinical medicine, but I've only been doing it for this year for 9 weeks. So I had all of last year from September to July was clinical, and then from mid-August to now I've been clinical again. So fourth year, the course structure is kind of split into different areas. So you'll have general medicine, which they'll put you on a ward that's considered a medical ward. So that's something like cardiology or oncology or respiratory. So it doesn't involve any operations usually, but it's monitoring patients and giving them some tablets, hopefully, that make them better. So that's a medicine placement. Then you'll have a surgery placement where you'll go into theatres, watch operations, and that's if people are interested in surgery, they often really enjoy that. And then you'll have a GP placement. So we had a couple of 2-week blocks with GP where you're either shadowing an actual qualified doctor, or you and another medical student might run your own clinic. Well, that's really fun. So you'll see a patient, just you and the other medical student, diagnose them, and then you'll call the doctor in afterwards and make sure you're correct. So that I really enjoyed GP. I think it's one where you get to do a lot and learn a lot very quickly. And then you get a research block for 6 weeks where you can either do clinical research, either like in person, or you can do it remotely online. So I was looking at kind of asthma inhalers and swapping from traditional inhalers that use aerosol to powder inhalers, because the impact on the planet is much reduced with the powder inhalers. So that was my little project. So that's 4th year. 5th year is more GP. I think we have 6 or 7 weeks across the year with GP. Another surgery block, but you get to choose which surgery you do, which is quite cool. Same with medicine, another medicine block, and you get to choose psychiatry, neurosurgery, obs and gynae, and peds. And then 6th year is kind of a bit of everything, and they throw you on the ward and hope that by this point you know what you're doing, because you're going to qualify in a year. So it is very different to preclinical, and we don't have many lectures. We have a week of lectures every term, and that's crazy intense. It's like 9 to 5 lectures just for a week every day. But most of the time it's just on the wards seeing patients.
Damn. So were you in the GP this morning?
I was in GP earlier this week, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then this morning I had a seminar up at Adam Brooks before my supervision, and that was looking at psychiatric presentations in general practice, because I've just, before my GP block, had a psychiatry block, so it kind of all ties together. Because GP is the weird one where patients present for the first time often, and they have basically anything and everything under the sun, and the GP has to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Damn. What a way to end this, end that note on. Well, thanks, Louisa. Thanks for joining us. Loads of information about medicine, both preclinical and clinical. And yeah, thanks for the viewers for listening or watching, whether you're looking at your podcasting platforms or on YouTube. We're hoping to get more students, interview more students about what it's like studying their course and what's life like at Cambridge. So yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Cool. Thank you.
Nice. Oh, how are you feeling?
Yeah, good. I do not want to watch it.